Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, IT as a Service and the Market Evolution of NIS. I'm Justin Surgeon, and I'll be hosting today's session. The market for network infrastructure services is evolving as customers transform to opex-centric business models and approach IT purchase decisions with a focus on workload-centric solutions. Demand for product-attached services is waning in favor of managed and cloud-based services, creating an opportunity for service-centric providers, such as Accenture, to gain from product-centric providers such as Cisco. This heightens the importance of product-centric providers, building from their status with customers as trusted network suppliers, rapidly improving their ability to target business-centric pain points with broader solutions as opposed to point products. Insights from today's presentation are also shared in the TBR special report, also titled IT as a Service and the Market Evolution of NIS, which published yesterday. You can find this report on our website at tbri.com. Now, before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, I'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. You can visit that channel to watch this presentation or any of the previous webinars we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on what we're presenting today. Please send any questions you have to the Q&A function, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And finally, I'll be following up with all of you via email tomorrow afternoon with the link for the recording today as well as the slides from today's presentation, so be on the lookout for that. Now I'd like to introduce the analyst presenting today. Data Center Analyst Krista Macomber is the leading contributor to TBR's syndicated program and custom research and coverage on IT infrastructure, including servers, storage, and data center networking. In this role, she is a primary author of TBR quarterly reports covering Dell, EMC, Cisco, and Juniper. She coordinates and is the lead author of TBR's quarterly data center benchmark and NIS benchmark, and semi-annual cloud components benchmark and enterprise network vendor benchmarks. Today with us, we also have Christian Perry, who is the principal analyst and practice manager for the data center research area in TBR. And with that, I'd like to hand this over to the analyst.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Justin, and welcome to all of our attendees today. Thank you for joining. So Justin outlined this concept of evolution within the IT and the networking marketplaces, and indeed we do see strong evolution occurring. What we're seeing is that over the past 3 to 5 years, customers are increasingly migrating towards more converged data centers. And I should actually take a step back here and note that we will look today at convergence from 2 different perspectives. One of them being from a technology perspective, and another one being from more of a business perspective as well. So as I was beginning to discuss, from a technology perspective, we're seeing that customers are migrating from data centers that were more siloed between servers, storage, and networking towards data centers that are more converged. We believe that they're doing this to reduce management complexity and as well as to improve workload optimization. But what we're also seeing is that IT is beginning to converge with business as well. We're seeing that as customers begin to shift IT from more of a cost center to more of an enabler of business outcomes, we're seeing that line of business executives are having more of an influence on purchase decisions today. They're looking to IT to improve their business agility, to gain new insights, and overall improve business outcomes. So this is resulting in the need in the industry today for more strategic and more business-led initiatives around technology. And that certainly portends strong change from a vendor's side as well. This does portend a lot of opportunity for suppliers of network infrastructure services, NIS, which is what we're focusing on today. But it also does portend the need for strong change from a strategy perspective. And before we dig into that, I would like to give a couple of definitions here for some items that we'll be focusing on during the conversation. The first, so we've talked about this concept of network infrastructure services. TBR does define this as maintenance, deployment, professional, and managed services for enterprise network infrastructure. You'll also hear me talk a lot about network modernization initiatives on the part of customers. And what we mean when we're talking about this is we mean initiatives on the part of customers to upgrade their infrastructure to meet new demands such as mobile connectivity, such as higher bandwidth as well for big data storage and analytics. And this really, we believe, is culminating in trends like deployments of cloud computing architectures, and also software-defined networking as well from more of a network-specific perspective. So with that established, I'd like to now shift a little bit to talk about the opportunity that we see for the network infrastructure services suppliers. And what we're seeing is that these suppliers previously used to operate in more of a siloed manner. We talked about how customers are migrating towards more converged data centers and towards more converged business practices between IT and the line of business. And as they make this transition, we're seeing that also the suppliers need to begin to act as change agents. So really increase collaboration across their services teams, between their services teams and their sales organizations as well, to begin to better meet the need in the industry for this more of a business outcomes focused approach to technology. From the standpoint of the suppliers, we do believe that their technology experience and also their product support capabilities as well will remain very important and very critical. But we're also seeing that customers are beginning to lean more on managed services and professional services as well as we seek to reduce their OpEx and also, as we mentioned, really drive towards these improved business outcomes. So that does portend a lot of disruption to the vendor landscape, which we will discuss today. And we'll focus specifically today on 3 particular areas. So the first area we'd like to walk you through today is the market for maintenance network services. We will talk about some of the evolutions that are going on in this marketplace and how suppliers are really working to position these capabilities as the foundation for those more strategic and those broader initiatives with customers. We'll also take a look at managed services. So I talked about how customers are seeking to reduce their OpEx structure, and of course they're leaning pretty heavily on managed services to be able to do that. And then finally, we will give some additional color around these critical consulting capabilities, which really do help the suppliers to better emphasize and enable those business outcomes. I talked on the previous slide about how maintenance and support services will remain critical, and we do see that culminating in our research here at TBR. A lot of the insights that you'll see today are actually derived through our Network Infrastructure Services benchmark, and in particular our 1Q15 report, which published earlier during the summer. And what we saw in that report was that the maintenance revenue for vendors we benchmark within that report, which include a number of vendors such as Cisco, Infosys, Avaya, and IBM, and more, we saw that maintenance revenue for these vendors rose just over 2% year-to-year in 1Q15 to $2.7 billion. So what that implies to us is that, as I mentioned, maintenance services, they're not going away. They remain very critical, but we are seeing that the scope within this marketplace is beginning to change as business enters the conversation. We're seeing this scope change from a couple of different perspectives. First, when we look at the core support services themselves, we do see actually a lot of transformation happening within these services. We're seeing that suppliers are investing more in automated and proactive support services as opposed to more reactive break-fix support services. And we're also seeing that support personnel now have to support new technologies that are entering into the enterprise as well, for example, such as software-defined networking. And we believe that these different investments are all very critical from the part of suppliers in terms of really enabling that shift to more of a service delivery IT model that customers are demanding to be able to achieve that business agility. But this does create a threat to existing services personnel. This means that they need to learn new tasks. This means that new personnel might be required as well. And we do believe within suppliers' organizations that there will be some internal resistance to this change, and that will require actually some strong cultural changes in the suppliers' organizations to be able to very effectively accommodate this demand. And also another thing that we believe this is changing is that we think that within customers' organizations as well, there will be some internal resistance to change from the perspective of the IT staff as well. these IT staff are going to have to adjust to different roles, different requirements, and they will look to their vendors to help to, again, navigate this transition. Ross?
So this is Christian. I just want to add a point here around this increased scope that Krista is discussing. This actually parallels a broadened scope that we see across other areas of enterprise IT. We see this actually across all of enterprise IT, not just networking. In particular, when we look at emerging areas or emerging technologies or emerging ways of doing things to enable the business, for example, things such as hyper-converged or even traditional converged infrastructure or software-defined storage. Customers are spending more on consulting, they're spending more on strategy, they're spending more on attempting to gain an understanding of how IT can enable the business, can accelerate the business. So this, from a customer standpoint, the customers are, yes, they are looking at this on the networking side. They are becoming accustomed to looking at this broader scope. That's definitely good news, but I absolutely agree with Krista in terms of the challenges involved here in order to accommodate that wider view.
Great, thank you very much, Christian. And just one other point on this slide before we move ahead to the next is that, so as Christian mentioned, customers are beginning to purchase with a focus on this more holistic scope, and from a maintenance-specific perspective, what we see happening is that from the supplier standpoint, they're having to position these closer to the box, more product-centric support capabilities as a foundation for this broader stack that we see here, kind of leading to those more IP-driven, higher-value services that we see, really within the advisory and the consulting layer towards the top of the stack here. And as we've alluded to, we certainly believe the vendors that are able to provide the full range of these capabilities will be those vendors that are able to win in the space. And looking a little bit more closely in terms of how the suppliers are going after these opportunities, within the maintenance space, we do believe that cost optimization remains very important for customers, but we also see, again, that customers and suppliers are beginning to build out from this kind of technology-focused perspective to these higher value engagements. So what we see the suppliers doing is we see the suppliers investing to build capabilities, for example, like deeper engineering support, and I mentioned as well proactive technical support as well, to begin to drive towards those more solution-driven engagements rather than those transactional engagements that many of these vendors are more accustomed to. And that certainly is, a significant shift for many, especially from a go-to-market perspective and also from a financial perspective as well. And as we track this market, we sort of look at the suppliers from the perspective of two specific camps. One camp being the product-centric suppliers, vendors such as Cisco, and another camp being the services-centric suppliers, those such as IBM. And we see that these two types of vendors are approaching the space almost from opposite ends of the spectrum. So the product-centric suppliers, again, like Cisco, we see them continuing to monetize recent hardware product launches to drive those maintenance support contracts, but we also see that they're beginning to involve both their internal services capabilities and also their go-to-market approach to be able to adopt this more strategic view. We have an example here on the slide of Cisco, and what we see Cisco doing is really working to leverage its technical support services team to work a little more strategically with customers in terms of identifying areas of their network that they would like to transform and optimize, and also the business benefits ultimately that they would like to enable. And so from this perspective, we see opportunity for Cisco to overcome one of the big challenges that we do see for Cisco, which is that from a services perspective, it is seen less as more of a strategic consultant, and it's seen more as that, that hardware support provider. Maintenance services for Cisco services do account for about 80% of the revenue base. And so again, we see these initiatives on the part of Cisco as really creating a lot of opportunity for Cisco to continue that strong heritage it has in terms of networking innovation, in terms of strong support capabilities, to be able to deliver those more strategic advisory capabilities as well. But we do believe that Cisco and others will go up against strong competition from the services-centric vendors such as Accenture and IBM, because these consulting and advisory capabilities do play directly into the wheelhouse of those suppliers. We see that, for example, Accenture is working to leverage its maintenance and support capabilities as an important foundational aspect of engagements with customers. So Accenture, of course, has been known for cost optimization for customers from the standpoint of outsourcing, also from the standpoint of support capabilities as well. But we see that Accenture is working to build out more industry-specific capabilities, and we see that it's working to also identify, for example, areas where it can help customers drive towards a hybrid cloud environment. And as a result of that, we think that Accenture, in this case, is not only able to continue to deliver, that core cost optimization value, as well as its broad scope from the consulting and advisory capabilities, and really begin to filter in as well a stronger message around technology optimization as well. So next, I'd like to shift a little bit and discuss the managed services marketplace a little more specifically. Again, I know we've talked a lot today so far about transformation and cost optimization for customers, and we do see strong opportunity for the suppliers from a managed network services perspective. And this is a key opportunity not only for revenue growth, but also for market share as well, and I'd like to give a little more color on that. So I mentioned, again, those OpEx efficiencies and that business agility, and we see managed services playing an important role in that. So for example, we see customers beginning to migrate more of their unified communications capabilities to a hosted model as opposed to an on-premises model. We also see that customers are looking to their network suppliers to outsource more network functionality to more of a managed model. So for example, we see customers looking to their NIS suppliers for change management and hosting around newer software-defined networking deployments as one example. And so in this regard, certainly not only new revenue opportunities, but we also see opportunities for customer loyalty as well. And this is from the perspective of, we think that managed services create an opportunity for suppliers to talk about reduced risk for customers by helping them to meet SLAs, which, as we know in the industry, are certainly getting much more stringent. There are some competitive opportunities here as well that I would like to highlight, one of them being that as customers do shift more to managed services, this does reduce the need for support services as well. So, there's definitely an opportunity here for vendors to gain share from that perspective. But also, when we look at vendor performance as well, this comes from our 1Q15 NIS benchmark, which I'd mentioned earlier during the presentation today. When we look at this benchmark, we see within the managed services space that for the vendors, their revenue bases and also their year-to-year growth are much more closely distributed as opposed to other markets, for example, such as managed services as well. So we see big opportunity here for vendors to gain overall market share within the industry from that perspective. So cost takeout, we do believe it is very important with managed network infrastructure services, and we do see that suppliers are investing to build out their capabilities in this area to be able to accommodate that demand. We see that vendors are not only expanding their, for example, unified communications as a service, expanding kind of that portfolio of offerings, but we also see them expanding data center capacity as well to better support these managed services as well. And this brings up another important point that I did want to call out here today, which is that vendors in the space will have to pick and choose where they invest. I think that's from the perspective not only from a network services perspective, do they invest more in managed services, at the expense of maintenance services, for example, but it also extends into other areas as well. For example, how many investment dollars will be left to invest in partner programs, also for the product-centric suppliers as well. Of course, they have to continue to drive that hardware and software R&D as well. So again, this is something that we believe does create some risk for suppliers because they have to make sure that they're investing those dollars as efficiently, as smartly as possible to be able to maximize their opportunities. And I did touch on the previous slide about opportunity we see, especially for some vendors that are overall smaller in the network services marketplace to gain share through managed services. And I'd like to call out a couple of specific examples here, one of them being Huawei. We believe that Huawei's managed network services revenue grew about 36% year-to-year in 1Q15. And Huawei is really an interesting example across the data center. What we're seeing is that Huawei is working to build from the presence that it has on the telco side, especially from a networking perspective. It's working to, we believe, leverage that and build that as a foundation to sort of expand in the enterprise as well. And what we believe that, what we see happening in the network services space specifically is that Huawei is working with some of its large telco customers around these network modernization initiatives. And because a lot of those data centers are larger and more complex than on the enterprise side, we believe that Huawei is leveraging sort of those use cases, those customer case studies as proof points of its expertise to be able to gain share from an enterprise standpoint as well. However, there is one caveat here. So we do believe that Huawei will continue to have strong success, especially in emerging markets. However, as it goes up against stalwarts, for example, such as Cisco, we believe that it will be more difficult for Huawei to gain share from this perspective. This is because we do believe that Cisco has a large base of very loyal customers. We've already talked today about some of the investments that Cisco is making in itself to be able to accommodate this demand for network modernization. So again, we think that as Huawei begins to run into some of those customer environments, we believe it will be more difficult for Huawei to displace and gain share. And another vendor I did want to call out here is Microsoft. We believe that Microsoft's managed network services revenue grew just under 10% year-to-year in 1Q15. And what we see Microsoft doing is working to take the presence and the expertise that it has in terms of end-user productivity, end-user workspaces from more of a traditional and an on-premises standpoint. And we see that Microsoft is trying to bring that into cloud environments for customers. And a lot of what we see Microsoft doing is working to transition customers from more of an on-premises unified communications environment specifically and towards more of a managed or hosted Microsoft environment. So we do believe that that's helping Microsoft to drive growth in the managed services space. And then a final section that we did want to cover today is we wanted to give you a little more detail from a consulting and a professional services standpoint. We've talked about how we believe that these services will be very important differentiators. We've talked about how vendors are really starting to lead conversations with these capabilities. And we would like to, again, give you a little more color on what we're seeing from a vendor perspective, especially within this marketplace. So again, we've talked about how critical these capabilities are, and what we are seeing from a customer perspective is we believe that customers are looking first to their more traditional product and technology suppliers for their consulting and advisory capabilities. We're seeing that these vendors, again, Cisco being a good example, already have a large base, again, as I mentioned, of very loyal customers. These vendors already have a strong reputation for driving innovation from a networking standpoint, providing strong support and capabilities and maintenance capabilities for customers as well. And so as customers are implementing modernization initiatives across the network, they are looking to their product-centric suppliers as what we believe is a very natural first option. However, this does play directly into the services-centric vendors' wheelhouses. And so what we're seeing happen from this perspective is that the services-centric suppliers are really trying to dig into the more limited business consulting capabilities, especially, that we see the product-centric suppliers having, and talking about the comparatively much stronger, broader scope of integration capabilities, consulting capabilities as well. And we also see the services-centric vendors working to, leverage their expertise in terms of driving and enabling business outcomes for customers and really leading their market messaging with that. So we see them, again, building from these strengths that they have compared to the product-centric suppliers, but also beginning to work in as well some expertise that they have, especially from the standpoint of optimizing workloads, and not only just across the network, but also across the data center as a whole. I know we talked earlier in the discussion around how the data center is converging and customers are really approaching the data center from a broader perspective. We also see that they're focusing more specifically on projects and workloads as opposed to, for example, an upgrade of their network infrastructure. And so this does create an opportunity, we believe, for the services-centric vendors to gain share by not only leading with that visionary, those visionary capabilities and those advisory capabilities, but also messaging their expertise from a technology perspective as well. So the business outcomes do come critically into play here in the professional services space. And we're seeing that suppliers are taking a few different actions to be able to accommodate this demand. And one big action we see is that they're hiring new services staff. They're also investing in training existing services staff as well to be able to accommodate these, cloud-focused services, for example. And in many cases, that does mean that the services staff has to become more integrated. We've talked about how customers are looking for broader services contracts that really span across that scope. And so, of course, that does require the services staff internally at the suppliers to work more closely together. This does create a threat in terms of we believe some staff may fall by the wayside that are unable to make this transition. And I know we talked earlier in the discussion as well in terms of some of the internal resistance that we believe will be happening within suppliers' organizations that they'll have to overcome. Another point I did want to make is that we believe this is true for the services personnel specifically, but we also believe that this is true from a sales standpoint as well. And this spans not only suppliers' direct sales staff, but it also spans their channel partners as well. Suppliers can invest all they want in these high-value advisory capabilities and really bridging together these broad services capabilities, but if they are unable to, from a go-to-market perspective, really message those capabilities and the business outcomes they can make for customers, it's, that really reduces the effectiveness from a services standpoint. And as we mentioned before too, especially for the product-centric suppliers, these suppliers are more used to talking about the speeds and feeds of their technologies. They're more used to those transactional engagements that are close to the box. And so this, we believe, is a very difficult transition for the suppliers. And it's also a difficult transition from a channel standpoint as well. Channel partners are used to simply, selling boxes at a low margin, and now they have to begin to cultivate these broader solutions that do integrate cloud services. Another example, too, is that in some cases, partners and the suppliers themselves, and the large suppliers such as Accenture or Cisco themselves, may have some competition in terms of different areas of the services market that they play. So it does integrate some new cooperative dynamics, for lack of a better term. Again, all things that we see the NIS suppliers working to overcome. From the standpoint of Cisco, we have mentioned that Cisco is investing to fill out those consulting capabilities, and what we see Cisco doing specifically is investing in reskilling its staff, as we talked about from an overall standpoint, really investing to expand those business consulting capabilities. And we also are seeing Cisco to begin to message broader solutions capabilities. We see that Cisco is working to, not position strictly as that provider of network hardware as it did in the past, but we see that Cisco is also working to articulate the broader solutions capabilities that it has in areas like IoT and hybrid cloud, and also begin to integrate into the conversation those business outcomes for customers. But it will go up against vendors like IBM, which we did want to call out here because we do see IBM as a really excellent example of going to market with that really broad end-to-end approach. From an NIS standpoint, we see that IBM is working with customers to first optimize their infrastructure. We see that IBM is, engaging very closely with customers, doing cost optimization, workshops and assessments with customers to help them understand which particular areas of their network environment is perhaps functioning less efficiently than it could, and also, of course, integrate the vision in terms of newer technologies that customers can integrate into their environments to better optimize. But we're seeing that IBM is not stopping the conversation there. We're seeing that IBM is also working to extend this conversation into, for example, the business processes that customers have in place, the staff that they have in place, as well as other tools as well. And we're seeing that IBM is integrating these into the conversation also from the standpoint of helping customers optimize their environment, not just from an IT perspective, but also from a business perspective as well, to be able to drive towards those better outcomes. So again, certainly a very strong, broad end-to-end approach that we did want to call out here, and we do believe that that does create opportunity for IBM to gain share in this particular market. So I know we've covered a lot of ground here today, and I did want to take a step back and highlight 3 key points that we believe will be very important for NIS suppliers to be able to capitalize on this opportunity. And the first is really positioning as that strategic change agent for customers. Again, these IT modernization initiatives are very challenging. They not only incorporate new technologies, but they also incorporate cultural change, new ways of business, and customers are certainly looking to their network providers for help in terms of driving this transformation. We're seeing as well that, not only do we believe suppliers need to be able to have those consulting capabilities and that vision to help customers modernize their environments, but they also need to integrate the necessary maintenance and support capabilities and managed services as well to be able to deliver that sort of holistic services view. Again, outsourcing functionality where needed, supporting hardware as well from a long-term perspective where needed, and really helping customers to modernize their environments from that holistic perspective. And finally, we believe that helping customers to understand a clear vision in terms of the potential dollars saved, but also, we believe the potential revenue opportunities as well as a result of these modernization initiatives will really help NIS suppliers to drive home their value proposition and, again, really capitalize on this demand. So looking ahead, what to expect, we do believe that the market for NIS will continue to grow through 2016. We do believe that customers are spending we believe that customers are spending on these modernization initiatives, and that does create strong opportunity for the suppliers, especially from the standpoint of we believe that these contracts are going to grow larger. We believe that they're going to become longer-term, multi-year contracts as well. So this is a strong opportunity for suppliers to drive revenue growth and to also build some, a longer-term pipeline to revenue growth as well, in addition to, as I know we've talked about a couple of times, really driving that customer loyalty as well. But in order to capitalize on this opportunity, there is a lot of internal change that we see suppliers having to make to be able to capitalize. And this really comes from, as we mentioned here in the slide, optimizing services personnel to be able to accommodate the demand for these services, also continue to optimize their alliance structure as well, so determine which particular services they want to provide, how they want to provide them, and how their channel partners will enter and participate in the conversation as well. Again, these are, certainly not easy tasks for the suppliers. For the product-centric suppliers, we do believe that there will be 2 big challenges. One being transitioning the go-to-market approach to, again, highlight those business outcomes as opposed to the speeds and feeds of the technologies themselves. We see that vendors are making progress here. We see that vendors are making investment here, but we do believe that there is opportunity to continue to drive home those conversations. We also note that these suppliers will have to continue to optimize their services personnel to fill out those gaps from a consulting and an advisory standpoint. And from the services-centric vendors, there will be challenges as well in terms of we do see customers being very loyal to their product suppliers. Again, we do believe customers are looking first to their product suppliers for these advisory capabilities. So what that means from the services-driven vendors' perspective is that they also have to integrate into the conversation their strong expertise from an end-to-end sort of systems integration optimization standpoint, in addition to those broad consulting and professional services capabilities. With that, we would like to pause here and shift over to take your questions.
So the first question that came in, this question came in very early on. I hope that it was at least somewhat answered throughout the rest of the presentation, but let's go ahead and address it. Question is, this is the same story for the last 15 years. What exactly is new? And I will agree that there are certain themes here that indeed aren't new. Network transformation, the design, the deployment, the traditional support of new network technologies. Yes, it's something that we've seen for quite some time. I think the elephant in the room here is SDN, because this is a different type of network transformation. This is a level of customer interest that we have not seen before in terms of transformation. We've already seen it on the NFV side in telecom. And so the challenge, therefore, and when this question came in, we were talking about that broader scope in terms of services the customers are examining around consulting. Yes, around any consulting, they're going to be, around any transformation, they're going to be looking at more consulting, more strategy. But the challenge that we see for providers here and suppliers is tying that transformation, because we're talking about rather significant transformation. As customers move over into software-defined environments, the challenge for the providers is to then tie that transformation back to the business, because more than ever, we see the influence of business on IT purchases. No, we do not think that, and we see it actually, we know that business leaders still aren't signing on the bottom line of purchases, but they definitely influence purchases more and more as we see that IT and business convergence. So it's imperative that the providers and suppliers can show how this transformation will provide competitive advantage, will provide the ability to create new products, or to provide a head start or a distance from competitors with new products or even existing products, or will allow customers to enhance their customer services, or boost their workflow systems, or increase cost savings. These are all business. Krista talked about business outcomes. These are all business outcomes that have been around for 15 years or much longer. But we're seeing a difficulty in showing how this big upcoming transformation, and there's a lot of opportunity tied around it, can enable all of those things. And it has to be done so that both IT and business can understand. The next question. On slide 5, what are the consulting services and support about? Or is it more of a package of consulting services focused on other areas of the technology that support is then bundled with?
Sure, this is Krista. I'd be happy to give a little more color on that. And we do believe that this is more of a bundled perspective. So I know we talked a little bit about this slide in terms of some of the advancements that we believe need to be made from a support standpoint. But really what we're seeing is that vendors are looking for opportunities to integrate managed and certainly consulting and professional services as well. So as customers, for example, are migrating to SDN networks, not only do those new technologies need to be supported, but also we're seeing that vendors are seeing this as an opportunity to package their consulting areas as well with those more, close to the product or close to the box support services.
Next question. Does this, and this is the evolution that we've talked about, does this also imply that the buyer changes?
Sure. So this is Krista. So as Christian mentioned in the first question that he addressed, we do see that for the most part, IT does continue to sign on the bottom line, for lack of a better term. But what we're seeing is that these purchase decisions are increasingly a joint process between IT and between line of business. So although line of business may not be actually purchasing the technology, they're having great influence because the line of business executives are the ones that are, outlining the business outcomes and the business initiatives that need to be served by the technology. And then the IT staff needs to then, in turn, sort of determine the correct solutions to be able to address those business outcomes. And so from the perspective of the suppliers, this is really about being able to bridge that gap because IT and business, they certainly don't speak the same language. And so we're seeing that the vendors, the suppliers rather, that are able to help to, sort of translate back and forth and that are able to bridge that gap are going to be the ones that we believe will be the most successful in the marketplace.
Thank you. Next question. In order for an established solution provider to retain his NIS business in highly converged cloud-based environments, would you say the ability to support third-party products is mandatory? Do you see this trend in the market?
Sure, and this is Krista again. Yes, I think we definitely see that this is mandatory, and in fact, so I know we talked about sort of the product-centric versus the services-centric vendors, and this is a great opportunity for the services-centric vendors because what we're seeing is that customers, they don't want vendor lock-in, they want flexibility, and their environments, as a result of that, are increasingly become more heterogeneous. They're accepting this as, simply a part of what needs to happen. And so we see this as an opportunity, especially from a services-centric side, because they're able to, position as a vendor without, without being partial to driving customers towards, a certain hardware or a certain product deployment. And so they're able to sort of position as, having that additional, being unbiased from that perspective, whereas we think that, there's the risk that customers may be more skeptical for the product-centric suppliers that go to market with that end-to-end stack from services through hardware. We see that customers are beginning to be a bit skeptical as well of the potential for that vendor lock-in and whether or not the solution is truly, optimized for their needs, or is the suppliers, trying to drive them towards, again, that end-to-end scope from that standpoint.
Thank you. Next question. You mentioned that Microsoft is trying to drive customers to its cloud-based UC apps. Can you give more details on that?
Sure. So, I mentioned that this is sort of a corporate initiative that we see on the part of Microsoft, really trying to evolve to be, more of a cloud player and especially a productivity player in the cloud. And so what we see Microsoft doing is we see that Microsoft has begun to de-emphasize some pieces of its business that have been underperforming. For example, its advertising business as well. So, that certainly includes paring back investment, divestitures as well as necessary. And this goes back to, I know I mentioned during the conversation today that we see vendors are having to pick and choose where they invest. So this is an example of a vendor, in this case Microsoft, choosing to shift investment dollars away from that and choosing to invest more, for example, in Azure and in its development capabilities. And what we're seeing is that Microsoft has actually, launched an integrated business unit for both cloud and enterprise. And so as a result of that, it's really investing to go to market with this more unified message, more unified portfolio that help it to position as more of an intelligent cloud platform provider. And so the more we think that Microsoft can integrate, the productivity from an end user perspective, the productivity capabilities, for example, with the more traditional offerings like Office, as well as its development business as well, we see that this approach is helping Microsoft to sort of drive customers more towards a managed Microsoft environment.
Next question. Do you have any insights from a geographical perspective?
Sure. So, and again, this is going to be primarily based on our 1Q15 report. And what we saw is that the NIS market is very similar to other technology markets from the perspective of some geopolitical issues between China and Russia and the U.S. did have a strong impact on financials. And we believe that those challenges drove revenues from the EMEA region and APAC as well down on a year-to-year basis. But also what we're seeing is that, you know, as sort of these challenges persist, we are seeing that vendors are working to target, you know, IT modernization initiatives, especially in emerging countries, for example, in the Central America and Latin America region. And we also see that they're choosing to focus on opportunities, for example, with large public sector customers, also organizations, for example, around healthcare and financial services in more emerging countries to try to target these pockets of growth and opportunity and also reduce the impact of those challenges between the U.S. and China and Russia.
And we have one more question in the queue. How will this transition impact profitability?
Sure. So it's an interesting question. And what we're seeing is that we do expect that there will be some pressures from a gross margin and an operating margin standpoint going forward. What we believe being in the industry looks like is we believe that maintenance services are, you know, the most profitable services of the segments that we cover, which, as I mentioned, were not only maintenance but also professional, managed, and deployment. And so because maintenance services are, you know, sort of the highest margin, as customers begin to spend more on professional and managed, we do expect that gross margins will begin to become a little bit more diluted over the next 1 or 2 years, and even, you know, from a slightly longer term perspective as well. And another thing from a bottom line perspective, we've talked a lot about the investments that we believe the suppliers need to make, not only within their services personnel, but also with alliance partners as well. You know, we also see them making, you know, certain acquisitions, for example, to fill out their managed services capabilities as well. And so we believe that that will sort of, you know, compound these declining gross margins that we're seeing in the industry to drive down the operating margins as well.
All right, so that's all we have time for today. So thank you, Krista and Christian. And thank you, everyone, for your questions today. You can follow the analyst as well as TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here. And please check out our pages on YouTube and SlideShare as well to view our previously aired webinars. We'd like to also mention we will follow up with all of you via email with the recording as well as the slides from today's webinar, and we will also follow up with anyone who has unanswered questions via email. So before you sign off, I'd like to ask you to take a very brief survey on the information provided today. We're always looking to improve both the information we provide and how we provide it. So your feedback would be greatly appreciated. We'll leave the chat function open for another minute or so for people to send in any last-minute questions. Otherwise, thanks for attending and have a great afternoon.